This is lesson 4, Missing Nolan, part 1 of staging configurations. Today's learning objective is to learn about contemporary staging configurations and how they apply to the performance text Missing Nolan. By the end of this lesson, I should have been able to identify 8 different staging configurations and explain the features of each, be able to state the advantages and disadvantages for all of the configurations, and be able to answer a 6-mark exam question relating to staging configurations, which will be in lesson 4 part 2 video. So there's a few words that I've just mentioned in the learning objectives. Contemporary configurations and features will come up as we move forward throughout the presentation. Every time I'm talking about contemporary, this is used within the present day, so something that as a 21st century audience would see. Configurations is the arrangement or position of the stage in relation to the audience, so the different positioning of the stage. And features is something that's a prominent or noticeable part or characteristic. An example of that would be Big Ben. A prominent or noticeable feature of that is the clock face. So when I talk about the configurations, each of them have something that's noticeable that tells them apart from all of the others. As we go through this part 1, you should see this document within the files. I would like you to be filling it in. I've provided you with pictures. I've also provided you with one example, which is the top one. I would like you to write a description in your own words of the staging configuration. I would like you to write down in bullet points some of the features. Again, the same for the advantages and disadvantages. Now, I've given you quite a lot of information in my example. I've also given you a lot of information throughout this lesson. You don't have to write all of that down. Just the key points will do. The first staging configuration that we're going to be looking at is proscenium arch. So proscenium arch is a type of end-on staging which there is a frame around the stage. This staging configuration is associated with older, larger theatres and opera houses. This staging configuration is probably the most common configuration used within the UK. When we went to see Women in Black, it was a proscenium arch theatre, along with the majority of the theatres within the West End. A proscenium arch theatre has the arch that goes around the stage, giving us almost this box sort of feel, this television feel. You can see in the little diagram that I provided in the top right hand corner, I've got a little dashed line just above that. It says the fourth wall. This is where in naturalistic theatre that fourth wall would be. So when we say we're breaking the fourth wall, we're knocking that down and making that connection with the audience. This is the part of the lesson where you should be able to identify all of these different staging configurations and explain the features of each. So you can see some pictures there of the proscenium arch theatre. So proscenium arch theatre, some of the advantages, disadvantages, and then those features. So I'm going to start off with the features. They all have an arch around the stage. That could be a curved arch, that could be a straight arch, but the key thing is that it has that arch. You could still have the audience sitting in one line facing a stage, but without that arch, it wouldn't be a proscenium arch. It has a fly space above the stage. So what the fly space is means that backdrops and pieces of scenery can be dropped down from the ceiling onto the stage, and then when they're done, they can be lifted back up out of the view of the audience. There's a giant space above the stage area. Either side we have wings of the stage, which is where the actors' entrances and exits are usually, and they can also hide props and scenery within the wings. A proscenium arch has a curtain which is raised when the play begins and quite often is lowered when the play ends. And the audience sits facing the same way towards the front of the stage. So some of the advantages, it is easy to use large pieces of scenery and technical effects in a proscenium arch theatre. Most of the audiences will look at the stage from the same angle. Box sets can be used without obstructing sight lines. It's really good for for naturalistic plays as a fourth wall is created. Lots of hidden storage space within the wings and fly space. Wings are good for entrances and exits. There's something I just said there about box sets. So imagine you have your stage and a proscenium arch stage. A box stage is a set that has three sides, which is open at the front where the audience look at, and it's almost like a three-sided box on stage. That's high sides, a high back, and you can see that. I will put a picture of the box set on the next slide. Some of the disadvantages then, one of the disadvantages is the distance between the actors and the audience can cause problems. The audience may struggle to get involved and be connected with the play, and it's difficult for actors to create a relationship with their audience. A sense of formality, less suited to non-naturalistic plays. Some blocking might seem unnatural, for example, to ensure that everyone is visible in the scene set around a table, for example. Remember, when I'm talking about blocking, blocking is the way in which actors are positioned on the stage. Two examples of what a box set would be like. So the first one, which almost looks like the inside of somebody's dining room with the windows, with the curtains, with a Christmas tree in the corner. But the point is that on the stage you can see that it has three sides of a box. The bottom right hand corner one is a set of Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. This is again a proscenium arch theatre, and they're set, we can see that they have three sides, almost like a box. They're like walls built up on the stage. This is what we would call a box set. So the next stage of configuration is the apron. The apron is the area of a stage nearest the audience which projects in front of the curtain. Now, an apron is a piece of staging that is attached to the proscenium arch. Now, if you look at the diagram that I provided you with, you will see that I've made a little change in purple from the previous one. We still have the stage, we still have the fourth wall, we still have the dashed line representing the curtain, we still have the audience in front. And then in front of that fourth wall and the curtain, we have a little piece of staging which is called the apron, which goes out into the audience. You can see on this stage you've got the curtain which is shut, and then you've got that apron again coming out into the audience, giving us a bit of space in front of that fourth wall. So some of the features of an apron then is that it projects out from the stage in front of the curtain / the arch. Some of the advantages: it helps to create a more intimate mood and atmosphere. It breaks the fourth wall, so you step out on that and you build that relationship with the audience. It's really good for non-naturalistic plays. Some of the disadvantages: actors may find this intimidating, walking out into the audience. Everything can be viewed from different angles, so whatever you do on it must be detailed, and naturalistic performances should maintain the fourth wall, so an apron wouldn't be appropriate. Now, this isn't an apron stage configuration. We would call this a proscenium arch with an apron. If you go back to the previous slide, you can still see that you have the arch, which is behind that apron. The third staging type that we're going to look at is a thrust stage. Now, a thrust stage is a stage that sticks out into the audience with the audience on three sides. Now, if you look in the pictures that I provided you with, we have one on the left hand side that's quite square, and you can see there are three sides of an audience. If you look at the one to the right hand side, we have three sides of an audience again, but the stage is not quite square. But the key thing to remember is that if the audience are on three sides, it is a thrust stage. If you, this is a picture of Shakespeare's Globe in London, again using a thrust stage. You can see on this one that the audience are on all three sides. The audience down there, and down there as well. So it is a thrust stage. It's going out into the audience. Some of the features of a thrust stage then, the audience are on 3 sides and the stage is protruding out into the audience. The advantages, the audience feel closer to the action on stage. Interaction with the audience is easier. Building a relationship with the audience is easier because you're a lot closer. Piece of scenery can be used upstage near the back, and it helps to create a more intimate atmosphere. Some of the disadvantages could be the sight lines can be blocked by large set items placed downstage. So if you place them all the way downstage closer to the audience, well, some of the audiences around the side wouldn't actually be able to see what's happening. Box sets can't be used. So like I showed you in the first couple of slides when I showed you the box set of Curious Incident, for example, that wouldn't be able to be used because the audience on the side would only be looking at the side of the set and wouldn't actually see what's happening inside of it. Blocking is difficult and must be done carefully to allow the audience to see what's happening. The next stage of configuration is called a traverse stage. Now, you might recognize this from being the type of stage that they often use on a catwalk show. You can see there's a fashion show going on in one of the pictures that I have got to you. You have a slim, long stage in the center, and you have audience either side of that, as you can see from the diagram and the pictures. It is a long central stage with the audience of both sides, which are facing each other. The features are long central stage, as I've already mentioned, and audience on 2 sides. The advantages are that the audience can feel close to the action. Audience members are facing each other, so are aware of each other's reactions, therefore providing a shared experience. Allows actors to create a strong relationship with the audience. If you go back to the previous slide and have a look at the catwalk image, the fashion show image that I provided you with, and you look how close that audience is, it is so easy to build a relationship with an audience that is close to you. However, some of the disadvantages of a traverse stage are that it's difficult to use large scenery in the centre as it will block sight lines. The long, thin area of the stage can make blocking more challenging. Lighting needs to be carefully plotted and focused to avoid spilling onto the audience. When we talk about lighting and we talk about spilling, a spill is light where we don't want it. Now, because it's so thin and long, it's very, very difficult to get the catwalk of the stage lit itself and not the audience. And backdrops can't be used. The next stage configuration is in the round, or theatre in the round. The audiences are seated around all sides of the stage. Now, don't get confused with thinking that in the round the stage has to be round. It doesn't. What it means is that you have audience on all 4 sides of the stage. You can see I have one round picture which has many entrances and exits, which hopefully you'll see what I'm talking about when I go to the next slide. I'm highlighting the entrances and exits on that picture now, but this one is round. The next one is square, and the diagram that I provided you with is square. The features of in the round is that the audience sits around all sides of the stage. There are entrances and exits through the audience, as I showed you on the previous slide. Some of the advantages creates intimacy with the audience, lots of entrances and exits, usually through the audience. The audience can see other members of the audience, therefore creating that shared experience, and it's easy to create audience participation because you're so close. Some of the disadvantages, any set changes will be made in front of the audience. There are restrictions for designers as backdrops or high furniture would limit sight lines. No wings or backstage area, only minimal amounts of scenery, and actors always are going to have their back to the audience. When we talk about designers and using backdrops, well, backdrops and set sometimes can make a performance a lot more interesting. But when you've got an audience that are sat completely around the stage, you really have to think a little bit out of the box to create a more interesting atmosphere for them. So I did have a video here that we were going to watch together. However, when I tried to export this video, I wasn't allowed to export it with the YouTube embedded into the PowerPoint. So if you click here, you can see a way that a designer has used the in the round to create some projections as a backdrop to the performance Peter Pan. You can see how they've created a London scene. You can see how they've created Captain Hook's pirate ship with these projections. The next configuration to be aware of is called a black box. A black box is a simple room with black walls, floor and ceiling. Usually there's no fixed or raised stage area, and the configuration can be arranged to suit the needs of the performance. In the diagram that I have provided you this time, I put a question mark in the middle because a black box studio, as you can see just below the diagram I've given you, is a neutral space. It's meant to be an empty space that you can decide how it is configured. The picture to the left of that is created in a black box studio, and they have decided to use the configuration of in the round. You can see the audience are on all four sides of that small stage that they have in the middle. Some of the features of a black box studio then it is usually a plain black room. It's a neutral space, has black walls, floor and ceiling. Some of the advantages: it's a flexible space in which seating and stage can be arranged to suit the production. So if you wanted to do it in traverse, you wanted to create a thrust stage, or you even wanted to do it in end on, you could do that in a black box studio. It can create an intense mood and atmosphere. It's suitable for experimental work, and it is considered a neutral space. If you think back to the lesson that we did on semiotics, and when I put a red gel in front of the light, you might have said blood, for example. Well, that's suggesting meaning to an audience. That colour of black is very, very neutral. It's as neutral as we can get it. So therefore not suggesting anything to the audience. Disadvantages of this space: it's usually a small space. It gets challenging to create large dynamic effects. It might seem plain or unexciting compared with other performance spaces like a proscenium arch theatre. If you think about the architecture inside that building, they're usually quite exciting. There's quite a lot to look at within there. The stage is on the studio floor, and tier seating would be required to allow all of the audience to see the action. Imagine if you were creating a performance in a black box studio and the seating was arranged like it is in assembly usually. If you were sat at the back of that, well, you're going to find it very, very difficult to see what's actually going on the stage all the time. Think about how many times you've been sat in assembly and you're close to the back and you can't see what's going on at the front. Whereas when you're in Romero, we have the tiered seating. So when you're sat on that, you can see what's going on the stage at all times. The next one is probably one of my most favourite ones. This is called Promenade, and this is used mainly for street theatre. My background, I've been a performer in street theatre for a long time, and promenade style performances is what I would usually aim for. So the audience often stand rather than sitting down and follow the performers through the performance. The performance is often at different locations. For example, if we took the school site as our main location and we had the courts, we had the sports hall, we had the quad, and we had the canteen. If this was a promenade style performance, the performers and the audience would follow around to the different locations, doing little bits of the performance at each of them. For example, like that. The features of a promenade style performance. The audience stand, the performance is in different locations such as the quad, the courts, the sports hall and the canteen. The audience walk with and follow the performers. Some of the advantages, this is a very dynamic type of theatre which involves the audience closely. To move an audience takes great skill. I've done many promenade performances. In fact, I did one where I was in Winchester High Street and I had to move an audience of about 30 people from the top of the High Street all the way to the bottom. And you can't really move people around like a queue that you might get at a fairground, for example. You need to move them with the performance, and it can be quite challenging for a performer. Although creating this dynamic type is also very exciting for an audience. It encourages an original type of storytelling and it creates a sense of occasion and event. Some of the disadvantages: the performers must be skilled at focusing the audience's attention and ensuring everyone can see and hear the action. Some audience members might find standing and moving about difficult. So the last performance configuration that we're going to be looking at is something called site specific. Now, this can get a little bit complicated. However, I'm going to try to give it to you as simplistically as possible. So it is a type of performance that is dependent upon the environment and location in which it is situated. Now, you can see two different pictures that I provided you with here. One which is set on a beach, which has a little metal frame around it. It has a little table in the middle and a chair. Now, think for a second, is that site specific? Specific means that there is something in that site that performance could not be done anywhere else. Well, not really. I could take that small metal frame, that table and that chair, and I could go and find a different beach type location and recreate that quite easily. If I was going to take the second picture that has the sort of Egyptian head in the background, well, I probably couldn't find that anywhere else in that location with those trees, the sort of woodland feel. So that would be site specific. If I was to do a performance there, that is specific to that site. Site is the location. So some of the features of a site specific performance is that it's set at a location rather than at a theatre. It is dependent on an environment. The advantages is it's a more exciting experience for the audience, helps the director to create the desired mood and atmosphere, fewer barriers between the audience and performers. Some of the disadvantages: performance space is unlikely to be well equipped. Every aspect of the performance needs to be brought in, and if the play is set in multiple locations, this can be a challenge. So, for example, if the play was set in a castle, if you were going to create a site-specific performance, you would go to an actual castle, and that castle would help you create the performance. But you would need to take everything to that castle. If that performance then had another location, such as the beach, well, that would be very difficult to create in that same location as the castle. I remember doing a site-specific performance within a woods, and we needed lighting, we needed sound, we needed platforms to perform on, and it was so difficult getting all of this equipment into these woods to perform. It created a great performance, but it was very, very difficult for us as creators to create this performance. What's next? So once you finish writing your notes, please watch the next video, lesson 4, part 2, or you can click here and that will take you directly to it.